households uncovered. And that has an impact. So I'll talk through some of this as it relates to me. I often like to think about this as it relates to my own family or friends that I have. So fortunately, I'm happily employed. But what if tomorrow I wasn't? What would my process be for finding a job? Well, one of the things I would do is go to my network, which I'm connected to on LinkedIn. Oh, immediately, I'm jumping on the internet. The first place I'm going is on the internet. That's where I'm going to search for jobs. It's where the Fortune 500 publish 80% of the jobs are published there. That's where I'm going to go. I'm going to reach out to my network. I'm going to do research on jobs. If I didn't have that at my disposal, I'd immediately be at a disadvantage. Well, let's say I find the perfect job and I happen to be in the wrong location, but they're willing to let me telecommute. Oh, geez, for a minute I might be excited unless I don't have broadband. Because if you look at what the Small Business Administration says, to do effective telecommuting, you need to have 25 megabits per second. Well, if I'm in the 3 megs, I'm really in trouble. And we know that not many have 6, and even less have 10. So I have a real problem right off the bat. I'm not able to compete with the working force that might exist elsewhere in the US, let alone on a global basis. Right? I look at my wife, and my wife's an educator. One thing we liked about my wife being an educator, it's a job you can take anywhere in the US. Well, folks who are in education have to keep up their accreditations. So she's often taking webinars at home, streaming, and it's multimedia, so she'll be watching the speaker that could be an expert from anywhere within the US. They do questions and so forth. You can't effectively do that, and she can't effectively keep her credentials live without broadband. Okay. Let's say you happen to be your customers are running a small business here. Well, we know they want to compete nationally, if not globally. If you're in agriculture, you're in a global business. Even if you just happen to be a local store and you want to keep the cost of your goods down, you want to be able to reach out to a network of suppliers across the US. Right? So you really need to be connected. If we think a little bit from education perspective, I talked about my wife from an education perspective, but we know that we're competing as a country on a global stage. And we know that broadband leads to an 8% higher graduation rate. Right? So what we do as an industry has a real impact on our country, has a real impact on our ability to be successful and compete on a global stage. Right? So you've heard from me for a little bit, but now we're going to let you hear from some others in our industry.
My name is Pete Anderson. I work with Farmers Telephone.
I'm Jerry Howe. I'm the CEO of Big River Telephone Company, Southeast Missouri.
Stanley Huey, Infrastructure Networks. We're focused on oil and gas vertical.
Justin Brewster with Pioneer Cellular.
We focus on providing service to customers in rural areas.
These are areas that still dealing with the dial-up connections.
Currently, our customers are being driven by the big corporations.
Probably the biggest issue is trying to address as many customers as you can across a fairly large landscape.
Everybody's just really scattered out.
Everyone today hears about faster speeds and more data, and so for our customers, they want the same thing.
LTE opens a world of possibilities for subscribers and people that didn't have access to this broadband.
It allows us to provide the security and the quality control.
So having to go through the construction of putting fiber or copper in the ground, if you do it with LTE wireless service, it's much easier.
Many counties are actually coming to us because they know that we're providing broadband to rural areas.
The moms and the dads, they have children who are in school. So now with LTE,
I'm going to be offering them a fixed solution for high-speed data.
Anything from movies, run a business through it.
So it is meeting the needs of them as well as growing our business.
The wireless business is a hard business to be in. It's not an easy thing to accomplish, but I think you can, and your customers want it. Rural America wants to do business with rural companies.
We've rolled out LTE, and we roughly cover about 73,000 square miles of New Mexico.
In the last year, we've put up 14 LTE sites from scratch, and we were totally green, had absolutely no experience in wireless whatsoever.
Having partners is the only way that we can deploy the same type of technologies that Tier 1s do.
We're kind of leapfrogging, going in, offering a broadband wireless service where traditionally they've had to go with satellite services.
We're certainly looking to expand with a service offering.
It allows us to capture a lot of customers that don't have access to this.
Now they're able to really enjoy the internet as most people in metropolitan areas have for the last 10, 15 years.
For the LTE, we just see it as being an integral part of our future offerings. It's just going to get better for us.
Well, as you can see, I think there are others across the industry who agree that there's a need. Customers want this, whether they're in a business or they're an individual. So we have an opportunity. I personally think we have a responsibility in the industry we're in to try to help fulfill that need. Right? It's not easy, though. And we know it's not easy. We heard about some of the challenges this morning. I'm going to go over some of them again. Across 3 different dimensions that we'll kind of look at. One is spectrum. Can't do anything without it if you're in wireless. But we know that it's expensive. So it's one of the major factors that you're thinking about from a business plan perspective. Right? We know that you have challenges in making sure that the spectrum that we purchase is aligned with what the national operators have. And with the help of the FCC, we're getting better at that than we have been in the past. And it's critical because that leads into the other point, which is devices. And we know that just because you're in rural America doesn't mean that you don't want the new Apple device or the new Samsung device or that you should have something less, right? You also know that they don't want to pay more, right? So how do we come together as an industry to make sure that we can service their needs as effectively as we do for somebody who might live in a metropolitan area? And then obviously the infrastructure costs. If you're going to get into building out an LTE network, you're going to start with building out a new core, right? So right up front, you're going to have some initial high costs of entry. You're going to go through an IP transformation. It might be an opportunity where you're figuring out, do you have the right skills? How do you bring up your employee base to the skill set that you need? And as you go through all of these, inevitably, you're going to start thinking about who should you partner with, right? What's your strategy around partnering? Right? So you're going to go back through some of the same dialogue on initial funding. How much do you have? How much do you need? How do you offset that? Right? Spectrum, again, jumps out as a major topic. Then you think about, well, what happens after I have the network up and running? Do I have the talent that I need and the number of people I need to keep that running operationally? Is there a partnership model that would be more effective for me? If you're thinking about partnering, well, you have to think about shared control. Now, for somebody like me, shared control, that's a hard thing to do. I grew up with my dad telling me if you want it done right, do it yourself. Right? So I struggle sometimes when I think about giving up control. But I'll tell you, we have to partner. We have to figure out how to establish partnership models that work. Right? You heard that in the video. I firmly believe that if you take on this challenge solely thinking that you're going to do it all by yourself, you will fail. Right? We are an ecosystem, and an ecosystem that has to work cooperatively with partnerships. That obviously requires that you trust your partners, right? I know rural America likes to do business with rural America, and that's great. Sometimes you have to expand beyond that. And when you look at some of the business models that are out there, and there are a few that I'm going to talk about, this is not an exhaustive list at all. But I wanted to give you a flavor for some of the things that have emerged over the last few years. So if you look at what West Central Wireless and Farmers are doing with a hosted core, you said, well, you can bring the spectrum, you can work your ecosystem, but you can leverage the initial core infrastructure that they built out and scale off of their investment. You might say, well, maybe you need more help than that. Right? And you kind of look at the Sprint model. I think the Sprint model is very flexible. Bring your spectrum, use their spectrum. Bring your devices, use their devices. Bring your core, use their core. And there's iterative combinations here that give you a lot of flexibility on what you're going to do. Right? Or you can go and look at something soup to nuts from the Verizon model. Not as flexible, but a fairly straightforward model. They have the spectrum, they have the ecosystem of devices, they have the core. Go build it out, operate the network, bring the customers. Pretty straightforward. I think we're going to see lots of models emerge. Right? This is a beginning, but we're at the beginning of the process for LTE. We're nowhere near the end of it. Right? And in rural America, we have an awful lot to do to get to where we're going. If you look forward and say by the end of the decade, the beginning of the next decade, those people who have 3 megabits now, well, the median household will have 15 megabits per second towards the end of the decade. So if you're starting with 3, 5x just to get to the median, right? So we are at the beginning of this. Beyond partnerships, there are some new technologies we're bringing as an industry. So those of us who have been in the industry for a while think about it. We always start thinking about things from a macro perspective, the macro network. But in today's challenges, we have new challenges. It's not just about coverage. It also gets into coverage with capacity. Because we looked at the coverage numbers, and they weren't horrible at 3 megs, but the problem becomes when you really need capacity. Small cells are one tool to go in the toolbox. I'm not going to say that they're the end-all, be-all solution, but they fill a need. So for those of you who haven't explored small cells in the past, I recommend that you talk to your vendors in open dialogue about how they may be a useful tool for you in certain environments. Right? So as you walk away from here today and you're going to listen to lots of presentations, and hopefully I expect lots of good information. But hopefully we grounded, and I was able to ground the rest of the few days on the fact that we still have a significant population that's underserved. Right? I take personal responsibility in trying to figure out how we're going to solve that, as I know many of you do. And we'll learn about lots of things over the next few days that will help us do that. Fixing this problem's good not only for the individuals, it's good for the U.S. Let's be clear, we are competing in a global economy. Having our businesses and our residents connected is critical to that. And LTE will help drive the economic growth to keep us competitive. Right. We're seeing lots of business models emerge. There'll be more that emerge. I mentioned just a few, but there'll be more that come about over the years to come. I expect that will be from everything from device partners and infrastructure providers. We'll have models that emerge, I think, with support of CCA helping to come up with some ideas that we then drive into business. Right? So just expect more. And we'll continue as an industry to provide new tools to help solve the problem. Small cells happens to be one of the newer tools that are emerging. There'll be more that come about. We're not going to stay still because we know the needs of our customers aren't going to stay still where they are today. All right? With that, I think we're pretty close to on schedule, and we'll move on to our next speaker.